perfect timing.
Super got to figure out where there's.
Oh, no.
Oh, the garbage?
Yeah, I don't. I'd probably rather avoid like if I'm like this,
Yeah,
I'm probably standing in front of the
I didn't
screen.
know if you wanted to sit behind this podium type thing that is the table.
I'll probably do better standing, but I could
Oh, I
stand.
didn't mean sit. Sorry, I
Oh,
meant
just
standing.
be like, yeah, over here is probably good. Once we get everything, because then I won't be in the way of the screen, and then I'll be able to. Yeah, yeah, that should be good.
All right, we're going to start in about 2 minutes. Be sure to grab some more pizza or soda or beer, whatever your thing is. I don't know what your thing is. You know what your thing is. You should get your thing.
Let's see how we're gonna do that. 69%. Yeah, it's fine.
We could get
Yeah,
everything plugged
actually,
in
that's probably.
in case you need it.
Let's do that. Having that need.
Is that better? Should I do this one too? Or? Oh, yeah. Check one. Okay, welcome to the DevOps KC June meetup. We're going to get started. We're live streaming, so if you're out there on the live stream, wave at me so I can see you. That's not how the internet works, guy. So I have a few announcements we're going to make, and then we're going to get to the main event that you came here for. First thing is DevOps Days Kansas City is coming up. It's in October on the 17th and 18th. This year we decided to do a Wednesday, Thursday because we have mostly local people, and then we want you to be able to go back to work Friday and start implementing all the awesome things that you learn. So it's going to be slightly different than last year's Thursday and Friday. The CFP was extended just today for this event. It's extended till noon tomorrow, even though it closed on Sunday. So if you have something you want to share with our community to help make our culture and our processes and our tools better, we really want to hear that. And if you are thinking about submitting and you don't know if it's a good idea, I can tell you it probably is, but reach out to me or any of the other organizers and we'll help you through the submission process and everything else. We really want to put on a really good show for you this year. The tickets are also for sale, and I believe they're early bird. If they're not early bird, then tell me, and then I'll get you a code, and we'll make it early bird for you special since you were here tonight. One announcement I have is that we've got a new logo, and I love it, so applause. Dan and I are going to live stream this Friday. If you've been following along, we've been working with GitLab to actually create a feature that our company needs. GitLab, if you're not familiar with them, is a very open company. Their product is open source. They have an enterprise edition version, and they are remote first. So they're a really, really neat company, and there's something that we need to create as a feature. So Dan and I are going off and coding that and fumbling our way through Ruby on Rails. So if you want the opportunity to kind of laugh at us as we learn, that'll be this Friday, and then we'll actually sync back up with GitLab soon and do the final live stream on that. So we got pretty far last Friday. I think we just got to polish it off this week. If you haven't joined the conversation yet, join us on Slack at devopskc.com. You can self-invite yourself to our Slack and join the conversation. We have pretty good conversations daily there, and we talk about this meetup and the conference, and just like a lot of times people are getting Terraform help is the cool thing to talk about right now, and a lot of people are talking about Kubernetes and AWS, so join the conversation there. We're live streaming out to YouTube, so give us likes out there, or join, subscribe. And this is where I turn it over to all of you. I know that you guys have announcements for things coming up. I can look at different people. I know that certain things are coming up, so feel free to raise your hand and let us know about things that are coming up. If you have other meetups, Kyle? Kyle's looking up the date. If you have conferences that we should all attend, if you have, did I lose my mic? That's probably good for everybody. If you have job openings, anything like that, feel free to just raise your hand or yell it out or come up here or whatever you want to do.
So the 25th of this month, we have a Kubernetes meeting. You're more than welcome to come. It's going to be about how to save money with Kubernetes using like auto-scaling features and things like that. So that Kubernetes KC meetup.
Kubernetes KC, is it CNCF or is Kubernetes?
CNCF, yeah.
Okay, and that's at C2FO?
Yes.
May 25th, mark it on your calendar now.
Except not May.
What?
Except not May.
Yeah. If you put it for May 25th, you might get a reminder right away. Is that how the internet works? I don't know. Is there any other announcements? I thought Dan had something. Agile. Dan wants to remind you to be agile in all of your undertakings. And I believe tickets are still on sale for KCDC. She's out.
I think it's Lean Agile KC. Their CFP is ending. I think it's their signups are open.
Signups are open for Lean Agile KC. I've been the last 3 years. I think you have too. It's an awesome conference. It's multi-track.
2 days this time.
2 days this year?
Yeah.
And are they still doing it at the same venue? Edwards campus?
November 9th, I think, or something like that. But it's
leanagilekc.com. Awesome. Any other announcements? Going once? Going twice? Okay, so we're going to have Matt on in just a minute. I'm super stoked to have Matt here. He's been a mentor to me for a number of years. He's worked at Chef. He works at PagerDuty currently. He runs the Arrested DevOps podcast, DevOps Days in Chicago, so he does a lot of awesome stuff. So I'm super excited for that. So thank you, Matt, for being here. Applause. But before we pull Matt up, I want to have someone from Alight Analytics come up because this space is awesome. If you can see like all kinds of downtown from here for you people on the internet, you should be here. But I was going to have Alight come up and talk about what you guys do.
Applause?
Yeah.
Thanks, Aaron. My name is Mike Wieners, and I represent Alight Analytics here tonight. I've worked here for about 5 years. I'm the lead integrations engineer. I started as a marketing analyst, and I've done almost everything in between since then. I just want to give you a brief history of our company. It was founded by Matt Hertig and Michelle Jacobs in 2008, primarily doing Google Analytics implementations, audits, things like that, and then reporting associated with them. Reporting's a pain in the ass, so they were like, let's figure out how to automate some of these data flows. So they did with Google Analytics data and AdWords, and our marketing analytics business sort of grew from there. So we're doing basically reporting and analytics for a broad range of brands up until that point. So that's the background up until 2013 when I actually know what was happening because I was here. I started in July of 2013 helping do those things I described. At that time we had 2 developers that were just sort of building ad hoc solutions, mostly run on our own workstations, files that we would get. At some point over the next year and a half or so, somebody realized I had a lot of value in the process. Ourselves to basically sell a platform of marketing data aggregation to support marketing analytics and marketing analysts, and that's what we continue to do, is to challenge ourselves to see where we're adding the most value, where we can make sure that we're giving our customers things that they can use to sell them stuff for lots of money, but that's worth even more money to them, so we can have this really cool space. Our development team is now a dozen people, up from 2 just 5 short years ago. And where we were once just really focused on selling analytics, reports, Google Analytics implementations, now our primary revenue source is the Channel Mix data aggregation platform. So really the entire company has been remade really since late 2014. So that's it. That's brief history. Who we are and what guides us are a set of guiding principles that we as a group decided upon. That there are these things, these 6 ideas that we're going to stand behind. I believe you can find them on our website. I'm not going to go through them in the interest of brevity. But we challenge each other to live up to those guiding principles every day, and that guides who we are. What we do, obviously, is provide marketing analytics solutions through data aggregation and reporting and analysis to our clients. And we do it in the pursuit of understanding the true value of marketing, so marketing dollars can be used as effectively and efficiently as possible, so that brands and agencies can spend their money on better things other than crap advertisements that make you click to swing the axe. Anybody seen that one? Man, it's a real pain in the ass, and I was trying to watch a video earlier today, so it's fresh in my mind. So that's what we do. We've got a few open positions. We just filled our open DevOps position, so I'm really sorry, but maybe Ryan will decide he hates us. That'll be a glowing endorsement, obviously, for anybody else who might want to work here. But we do have 3 open positions: a Director of Client Solutions and Insight, a Web Analytics Specialist, that is Google Analytics implementation. We still do that part of our business, and a Reporting Analyst. And our business changes very rapidly as we evolve to meet the needs of our clients and to find out where we can add value next. So keep on the lookout, and we appreciate everybody coming and visiting us for this meetup tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I love stories about like the companies that have just like grown up from nothing in the last 10 years in Kansas City. There's all kinds of them downtown here, and we'd like to connect with more of them for future meetups to have. It's amazing. We're still kind of, I'd like to get this discussion going on Slack, if we should settle on the same place every month, or if you guys still enjoy like the awesomeness that like companies open up their work area for you to come see how other people work, so you get an idea of like how other people work. So we can have that conversation later tonight after the main event, or we can have it on Slack, but it's an awesome one that we've gone back and forth for years on that. So always open to people's thoughts on that. So thank you, Alight, very much. This is awesome. So I'm gonna hand it over to Matt. We're gonna switch up the connections here. And here.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so my name is Matt or Maddie. You can go by either. I know who you're talking about. I'm really excited to be here. I haven't been to the Kansas City DevOps meetup for, it's probably been about 3 or 4 years. I was here piloting a talk a few years ago that Aaron very nicely let me, test out, which was pretty great. Yeah. It's called Making Infrastructure S'mores with Chef. There's a conference up in the Wisconsin Dells called That Conference that's a summer camp oriented conference, hence the camp name. Anyway, let me get myself set up here, and then I'll tell a little bit more. I don't tell a whole lot about myself because at DevOps Days Charlotte, a gentleman named Corey Quinn actually gave an Ignite talk that was pretty much making fun of the fact that most speakers feel the need to give you our entire resume before we speak, so you can be like, this is why you should listen to me. So the reason you should listen to me is, well, because, I'm here. So that's kind of legit. Let me go ahead and get myself started up here. Okay, let's make sure. There we go, clicker, oh, too fast. Okay. I'm gonna try to get come back. Is that how the internet works? This is how it works. Hey, okay. So we're gonna, there's an audio part of this deck, which we'll see how well it works. So if not, we'll just have to kind of do it live. It'll be great. Before I get started, so anyway, the talk is called Incidents and Accidents. And if you understand the reference of that, then more power to you. I'm a DevOps evangelist at PagerDuty, and I've got back over on the table behind the pizza, we've got a little bit of PagerDuty swag, some stickers, and also some stuff from my podcast. And before I get started, if someone could keep track of time for me, that's super helpful. So like I said, I used to talk a lot about who I am and what I do and why you should listen to me, but instead nobody really cares about that. So I just have a slide of my kids to get you on my side, because you're like, oh, look, he has cute kids. He's got to be a real human. So who here has been on one of those phone calls when you're trying to troubleshoot an issue, something's going terribly wrong, and you're trying to problem solve with fellow human beings? How many people have had to do that? How many people super love that and want to do it all the time? It's like none of us, right? So when we're working on incidents, they can be really tough, but there's definitely ways to make them less stressful. And that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, is how can we make this a less stressful experience. And a lot of organizations have process and structure around, I hate Keynote, around how they do incidents. Oh, that's okay, it's supposed to be blank. Yeah, this slide left blank on purpose. That's what I should actually say. I don't remember why I decided to do that, but maybe it's to make sure that everybody's paying attention. Anyway, the thing is, a lot of times we will have process for incidents, but we kind of make it up as we go along, when in reality, we can borrow from other industries. And this is something that I think we've learned in IT, or at least hopefully we've learned, is we've learned to profit from the mistakes of others, right? Shall we say? We started learning this when we think about the principles that the DevOps espouses, this all comes from the fact that these are solved problems that were solved by the manufacturing industry decades ago. So we're getting over this, hey, we're thought workers, we have different problems than the rest of the world, when in reality, all the problems we have, somebody else has already had, and there's probably other practices and other disciplines that have already helped solve for this, and we can learn from them and build on the shoulders of those giants. So I got a couple disclaimers. First one is we're going to learn from these other industries, but we're going to try to not take on their stresses. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. Some comes from the industry of air traffic control, some comes from first responders, and these are folks who deal with literal life or death situations. If you're a first responder, you're going in, you're saving people's lives. If you're an air traffic controller, you're, as the movie says, pushing tin. You're kind of dealing with these giant metal tubes that people like me fly around in, and you're going to try to make sure they don't hit each other. This is a very, very stressful position. So we want to inherit the interesting things that we can learn from these industries, but we don't want to take on their stress. There's generally no reason that a system administrator needs to have the same stress level as an air traffic controller, although it may seem that way sometimes. Hopefully most of us don't work in situations where a down system could potentially affect someone being able to live or die. These things do happen, but usually we're not dealing with systems that run nuclear reactors or things of that nature. If you do deal with systems that have that type of impact on humans, that's an awesome responsibility, and I absolutely have nothing but respect for carrying that mantle. But most of us don't have to deal with that, so we don't want to take on those stresses. The second disclaimer is that this is a topic that has a surprisingly large amount of details, right? It might seem as simple as, well, we'll get on a bridge and we'll work the problem and then the site will get back up and the end. But reality incident management and dealing with incident response is a very complex system because there's lots of things involved, especially lots of messy humans. So when we think about it, there's things like the impact to the business, the commercial response that we have to make, the business continuity plans we might have to follow, all the way through, there's organizational factors like what team owns which thing, and also individual psychology and how different individuals deal with stressful situations. This is a very short talk. We will only talk about a little bit of this, right? So bear in mind that this is not the be-all and end-all of everything that's going to be involved when you're managing incidents. So one of the things that's really important is that when we think about an incident, we're going to talk about what an incident is and what these things are, but I just want to kind of stress this idea that there's a distinction between normal operations and there is an incident in progress. So we switch decision-making from peacetime to wartime, from day-to-day operations to actually defending our business. So you think about it this way, fire isn't an emergency to the fire department. You expect a rapid response from a group of professionals that are skilled in the art of solving whatever issues you have. That's a way to think about it. The way that you operate, your role hierarchy, and the level of risk you're willing to take will change as we change from peacetime to wartime. And I know a lot of us don't like kind of the paramilitary metaphor, so we could do things like call it normal and emergency. I don't really care. It's totally fine, right? You could even even just say it's called okay and not okay. The thing that matters is you're making a mental switch, a shift from business as usual to stuff's on fire, yo, right? So we're going to talk about this a little bit more. And one of the things to bear in mind is that the way that we perform incident response, and I'm going to be speaking a lot, I should give it a little bit of background, I usually do. I'm telling you about how we do incident response at PagerDuty. This is not about how to use PagerDuty to do incident response. PagerDuty is super great at doing that, and if you do things the way that we do it within our own organization, you'll probably have a great day. But you don't have to. So to follow any of these practices, you don't have to use our product, which is a great thing to hear. Anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do incident response at PagerDuty, and these are things that we learned, again, from first responders and some common ways of doing things. So we're going to break this up into 3 sections. We're going to talk about the before, the during, and the after. So these are the things that you should do before there's an actual call at all, before anything actually goes wrong. The things that happen during the incident. And then the part that most people forget about is the things to do after, because usually this is when it's 3 in the morning and we're done, and all you want to do is go to bed. And I'm sorry, there's still a little bit more vegetables that we have to eat. So there's different things to perform and consider at each of these phases. And all three of them are equally essential. We always think about during. During is where we focus. And during actually quickly becomes the easy part because we know how to do that. We know how to solve a problem, usually. So we're going to talk about before. These are things to think about before anything goes terribly wrong. Things you can do today, tomorrow, whatever. This is really important. You need to have criteria defined before anything happens about what actually causes an incident. What is an incident, you know? And these are things that should be driven by business-related criteria. So, for example, order volume may be 20% less than normal at this particular time of day. That's a business-driven metric. That's something that matters, right? System-level alerts like CPU utilization, disk usage, disk space, memory utilization, these are not the criteria to determine that something requires a call. You don't have a call because of high CPU. Now, the impact to the service may be driven by that, and these may be indicators that help trigger the need to make a decision, but they in of themselves are not a thing to say this is an actual incident or a major incident. I always go back to think about, had a scenario where I used to get paged and said, oh my God, we're having these problems with our database server. It's using 90% of the CPU. We're like, it's supposed to. It's using all of it, right? That's what we want in this particular case, right? So we're just so used to wanting to say like, oh, memory utilization is so high. It's like, well, that's why we have 24 gig of RAM in that server, so we can use it. So, but if that's abnormal, if that's not something that's normal, and more importantly, it's affecting our service, then it super matters. So if you're not sure whether something is an incident, you don't know whether to respond to it, this is what we call an incident at PagerDuty. Yours might be different, that's okay. Just make sure that you have it defined somewhere and you keep it simple so it's easy to understand. So we say it's any unplanned disruption or degradation of service that's actively affecting customers' ability to use the product. Okay, so a typo somewhere could cause this to be an incident. Now what we're going to talk about a little bit here is what's a major incident. Because when we talk about these ideas of incident command, these are things that are usually related to what we would call a major incident. And at PagerDuty, we consider it a major incident when this criteria comes into play and it affects multiple teams or multiple services. So if it's just one service that's having this particular issue, it's not a major incident because now major does not necessarily, in that criteria, does not necessarily mean it's important or less important. It just has to do with how we solve the problem, because it becomes infinitely more complex when we have multiple teams and multiple services involved versus something that's happening just within one part of the application. So this is important. You want to post your incident criteria widely. You don't want to litigate during a call. I can't stress enough this particular sentence, don't litigate during a call, right? You do this beforehand because we don't want to be arguing about whether or not this is important or not while something's going on. So the call is the time to solve the problem. It's not the time to argue about how important the problem is. During an incident, it can be really difficult to make complex business impact decisions because everyone's kind of frazzled, everyone's under a lot of stress, and we need to have this stuff figured out when we have the luxury of time to be able to evaluate what is the actual business impact and why do and let's have the proper discussions with stakeholders, not when we're waking them up at 3 in the morning. All these terrible things seem to happen at 2 or 3 in the morning, according to my talk. This also makes it clear to everyone involved in the process why we're doing the things that we do, right? Why did we make that flip from peacetime to wartime, from normal to emergency? And because we're gonna do things different than people are used to, and we're gonna make some people uncomfortable while we're doing this. So it's really important that we don't have to explain it while it's happening. We wanna post it widely because stakeholders and people who are not directly involved with the incident are gonna wanna know what's going on. So you'll see, in our case, we call them a SEV1, a SEV2, a SEV3. That's common to refer to things as severities. You could call them impacts, you could call them emergency levels, you could call them the King of France for all I care. It doesn't matter. The thing that matters is that you define what makes something be one of these and when might it move from one severity or one impact level to another, so you don't have to argue about it later. Because it's already, even if you post it widely and disseminate it widely, people are still going to argue about it during the bridge, but at least you have somewhere to point them to. We want to monitor the business criteria and act accordingly. So monitoring, using tools like SolarWinds or Nagios, again, like we said, that are watching things like your CPU utilization, your network bandwidth, your disk space. These are all great, right? But you want to have something that's going to look a little higher because we actually care about the service. We want to be service-oriented, one might even say. So if you think about something like a New Relic or Datadog or any combination of these tools that can help you understand how your application is performing. I usually find that things like your lower level system monitoring tools are really helpful for forensics, but you're going to get really flappy, really false positive type alerts if you're depending on that, because again, the point of your company is not to make effective use of the CPU on all of your systems, it's to sell shoes, assuming that you're a company that sells shoes. If you're an insurance company, then don't try to sell shoes. Ideally, your business or service level monitoring should work automatically to engage and start the process of an incident. That should be something that's super helpful. And we do a lot of that at PagerDuty, where we have automated trips and alarms, and hey, you know what, there's a product that actually helps you do things with that, I've heard. But it's nice to have your monitoring and your business level monitoring be able to automatically create an incident. Now, a sidebar of this is automation is great, but that shouldn't be the only way that it can be done. It's really important that any human can any human can cause an incident whenever, all the time, can raise an incident and declare an incident. One of the fellows who helped put together kind of our incident response process at PagerDuty is fond of saying that he's like, I want the janitor who's cleaning up at 2 in the morning to be able to glance over at a dashboard and see that things look bad and be able to cause a Sev 1, right? And he's not wrong. Because the thing is, we tend to have this belief that we're leery as humans of marking something as an incident, right? And it's probably for good reason, because it's usually a painful thing that we're about to create. But one of the things to bear in mind is it's always better to err on the side of starting an incident call and starting your incident response process and then determining it wasn't necessary, because the worst thing that happened out of that is you got practice at doing incident response. If you wait, a Sev 3 could become a Sev 1. So it's automation is not, you want to make sure that you have that automation, but always have the human pull the fire button or fire switch, right? And because the other reason is you have to watch your watchers, So at PagerDuty, it's kind of important for us that we're delivering notifications to you in a timely manner, because otherwise the product's not very helpful, right? If notifications are delayed, you're like, oh great, PagerDuty, thanks for telling me that 20 minutes ago things started going terribly, terribly wrong. It would have been nice to know that 20 minutes ago. So we have a system that's constantly checking how long is it taking, right? So that's great. So we have this great monitor that's telling us our business level things. Now we're also watching that monitor, because if we're not getting data from that, that's almost worse than having a delayed notification, because we're super flying blind at that point. Things could be going bad and we don't know. So you need to watch the watchers, because you might be having a business impact, but you can't be sure. And again, speaking of humans that can do all these things, and humans are key, humans are really, really expensive, y'all. In a large organization, how many people have ever been on an incident bridge with 100 people on it? I have. And 95 of those people are doing nothing, right? It sucks. It sucks for the organization because it's super expensive, because those people they cost literal dollars to be on that call. It's impacting their productivity, and it just super sucks to be that person, to be sitting on a call and you get frustrated, and it's really bad for morale. So think about this too. If of those 100 people, if everybody costs $100 an hour, that's $10,000 an hour, and it's not effective. So when you're deciding who is and isn't involved in certain parts of your incident response process, think about the human cost that's involved. So we want to design it accordingly. And as we learned in kindergarten, practice makes perfect. It still does. So I talked about that if we raise an incident when maybe it didn't need to happen, the worst thing that happened is we got to practice. That's great, because that's real practice. And we want to practice all the steps as we move from ad hoc to more reasoned approach and a more repeatable approach to how do we practice all those things we're going to talk about that happen during the during section. Now here's the key. We want to practice this when it's not stressful. We want to practice it when we have total control over the situation. So some organizations do failure injection, or if you want to be fancy, you might call it chaos engineering. That's a good time to practice incident response. If you do game days, whatever you want to call them. At PagerDuty, we do failure Fridays, although we don't always do them on Fridays. Sometimes there are other days of the week. But technically, it's a failure Friday. But we handle it like a complete incident. So even though we know exactly what happened, because we did it on purpose, and just for example, what we do on a Failure Friday is we will go and just turn something off. We'll intentionally break part of our production system in a safe and predictable way. And yes, we totally know what went wrong, and we still run it like a full incident. And what that lets us do is overall as an organization, it lets us get that organizational muscle memory going, because all we're doing is practicing steps in. We don't have the additional stress of trying to figure out what's actually wrong. It's also when we train our incident commanders, and we'll talk about what incident commanders do in a minute, but before you go on call as an incident commander in production, you're gonna run a Failure Friday because it lets you feel good about what you have to do. Because it's a time when it's during the day, you know what's wrong, and everyone's there to help you. So we do, so when you do these, use a game day, follow the same process and ceremony that you would in the real world. The other thing is you need to, before something happens, understand what the different roles are that are gonna happen, that are gonna be needed. And a lot of times we kind of ad hoc create these roles to be like, okay, so the on-call engineer is gonna run the call, and when the CTO calls in and wants to know what's going on, I guess they'll ask them, and we'll just sort of bring people in as it happens. And the thing is, if you're doing this ad hoc determination of roles during the incident, you're taking away energy and time from actually solving the problem. So again, these are things that we can figure out in advance, because the only thing we want to do while something's going terribly, terribly wrong is try to make it stop being terribly, terribly wrong. Anything we do that is not directly going towards figuring out, solving the problem and restoring service is a waste of time and energy. So this is a basic role structure. It's loosely based on some first responder practices. I think it's important for me to stress that this is how we do it. It doesn't mean you need to do it exactly this way. You may have more or fewer roles, but this gives you kind of a little bit of, I'll tell you some of the ones that I think are pretty critical. So at the top, we have the incident commander. And the incident commander is not a problem solver. In fact, they should absolutely not be doing anything to try to figure out what is actively wrong and going in, logging into systems and looking at logs and redeploying code or doing anything like that. They are managing the incident. They turn the crank that gets us from things are broken to things are less broken, and things are finally not broken at all. They work as a task dispatcher. As information is observed and shared, the IC can direct people towards the next steps that need to be taken based upon things that happened. One of the key things that they talk about in firefighting is, again, the incident commander is someone who exists in firefighting, and the incident commander in a fire department during a fire wears a white helmet. And the saying is that if you see someone in a white helmet carrying a wrench, take the wrench away and hit them in the head with it, because they shouldn't be trying to fix anything. And that's absolutely still true within IT incident command. They shouldn't be trying to do anything. We have a deputy for redundancy because, well, sometimes incident commanders have to do things like, maybe take a break for various reasons. Also, during the incident, there's things like directing and managing information flow, so that your deputy can help with things like setting timers and just some of the administrative things that might have to happen. You can see that we in this have it combined with the scribe. Sometimes, depending upon the size of your organization or how you're getting started, you may have these be the same person wearing the same hat. But the scribe is really important because, as we're going to learn during the after, we're going to want to review all the things that happened. And if we don't have some way of communicating this and keeping track of it, we're going to have a lot of recency effect problems, and we're not going to really remember. Then, what we think about it is we have the subject matter experts, which is just a fancy term for the people who actually know what to do and are going to actually try to resolve the issue. So depending upon on your organization, they may be aligned by teams. You may have the DBA on call, the sysadmin on call, the app admin on call, or they may be aligned by service. You may have the order service applications on call, the login service on call, load balancer service on call, et cetera. It doesn't really matter. The thing that's important is that a subject matter expert is a person who is most responsible for a given area, who also has the ability to most directly affect it. Architects do not make good SMEs, because usually architects don't have any ability to actually log into things in production and do things. So it's important that you have this combination of someone who can figure out what's going on and can actually take action. Remember, we're in not okay land when this is happening. This is when things like change control and stuff like that tend to go out the window because we need to be able to restore service. And yeah, I said it. So the person, this again, your subject matter expert is someone who can observe what's wrong but can actually do something about it. You want to have a clear understanding of who's supposed to be involved in each role, right? And again, there's this company that makes a product that helps you with this. And what's important about this is it lets you understand who is involved at any given time, right? And also who isn't. And so this could be as simple as just, when I say having a clear understanding, this is basically your on-call rotation. This is saying who, for this particular role, at any given time, is the person who is going to be involved. And the reason why I say by knowing who isn't is even more important than knowing who is, from the practitioner perspective, from the person who does carry that pager, figuratively speaking, it helps absolve stress, right? Because if I know that when I'm truly not on call, I'm truly not on call, that makes me feel a lot better about when I am on call. I have worked in many jobs, and I'm sure a lot of you have too, and some of you may still be there, where you have your time when you're on call, but even when you're off call, you still might get paged. And that really, really affects your work-life balance, and it makes you incredibly unproductive during an incident, whether you were on call or not, because it's a fiction. So the thing is, if I know this week I'm not on the hook, I can breathe easier. And there's a lot of tricks around this that we've started to do where we make our on-call rotations actually really short. So on-call for incident command at pager duty is 3 days. So you're never on call for more than 3 days at a time. And that makes you feel pretty okay with being on call those 3 days because you know you will be off for a lot more than that versus, I think about times when I've sat and I'm like, okay, I'm on call for, pretty elaborate financial institutions for a week at a time. And so that means for a week, I can't be more than 5 minutes away from a terminal. That's a really, really crappy week. But if it's 3 days, I can deal with 3 days. Okay, so let's talk about during. So this is and we're going to talk about this a lot from the perspective of the incident commander. So we're going to all pretend that we're learning how to be incident commanders. And by pretending, I mean, hey, guess what? You're learning how to be incident commanders. So the first thing that happens, every call starts like this. You introduce yourself, and you make it clear that you're the incident commander. And the reason that we do this, there's twofold. One, by introducing yourself, you're a human, right? I'm a person, and you know my name. And depending on your organization, you might be like, well, everybody knows your name because we're an organization of 20 people. That's great. You might be an organization of 20,000 people. But regardless, we're saying this is still a bunch of people doing stuff. And by specifying the words incident commander, it subtly instills this idea that I'm in charge. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but the incident commander, for the time of the call, is the absolute most important person in terms of seniority and in terms of authority. So this is why we don't do things like abbreviated as well. And we want to watch out for acronyms, like don't say things like the IC on the RC and get a BLT for all the SMEs. It does a couple bad things, right? It can, if we use too many internal acronyms and too much internal lingo, that could be really divisive to people who are new to our organization, who don't know all of our jargon, right? And it adds cognitive overhead, because I have to sit here and I have to parse this. Even if I know what all these things mean, I have to sit there and say, let's get the incident commander on the response call, and then let's get a bacon, lettuce, and tomato for all our subject matter experts. Okay, so I had to spend some cognitive time thinking about what all those things meant. And even today, I've given this talk a ton of times. I work at PagerDuty. I never remember what RC stands for. I think it's response call. Sounds right, So we want to favor explicit and clear communication over all else. So one of the key takeaways here is that clear is better than concise. Clear instructions are more important than concise instructions. And like I said, we want to favor explicit information over acronyms. Doesn't mean you have to write the great American novel and give a long essay explaining everything, but make sure that the instructions are unambiguous. Talked about this a little bit before. This is kind of key and sometimes controversial. But the incident commander, and I realize I'm using acronyms here, but that's because it's a slide, and I want to take up, The incident commander becomes the highest authority. Yes, even higher than your CEO. So no matter what your day-to-day role, no matter what your title is, the incident commander is the highest ranking person on the call. Just on the call. if the CEO joins, your incident commander outranks them in the incident response situation. This is actually critical for effective incident response, and it does require buy-in from your executives. Don't surprise them with this. It will not go well for you. We had this happen at PagerDuty where, so our CEO, Jen Tejada, it was about a year and a half ago when she joined, she had not been properly indoctrinated into our way of doing things. And she joined a major incident call and basically got on and said, I want this solved in 10 minutes. And the incident commander said, Jen, I'm going to have to ask you to please leave the call. And she did and was very, very upset, and then it was explained later. But then the incident commander said, that was actually really, really hard to do, but it was very necessary because it's very distracting and it works differently than the way that we're going to have to be effective. But again, socialize this before you do it. Don't catch people by surprise. And one of the things so the incident commander manages a flow of conversation. And what that can mean is part of that is actually is communicating back to those stakeholders or making sure there's a method of communication back to the stakeholders. As you grow, you can create a larger structure of people participating in the incident. You may have someone who's a communication commander or whatever you might want to call it, whose entire job is to kind of run the comms, which can be internal and external. And how do we communicate to stakeholders? How do we communicate to customers? How do we communicate basically to get people out of the way? One of the keys that's not in this particular deck, but is in our incident command training, we give in our incident command training, we give several examples of how to handle the executive challenges that happen on calls. But one of the common ones is what we call the executive swoop, which I think we've all seen, which is when you're running a call and your CTO or your CEO or someone jumps on and they immediately start just barking orders. And it's really detrimental because you're in the middle of trying to solve a problem and you've got someone who doesn't have context coming in and redirecting things. And there's a very simple way to solve for this. As the incident commander, you say, okay, Jen, are you taking command of the incident? And they usually get very quiet and let you return to what you're doing because they don't want to run it. Right? And the thing is, usually, again, people aren't doing this because they're terrible human beings. They're just trying to get some response and trying to understand what's happening. So redirecting in that way can be really helpful. Now, the communication, the flow of conversation goes in the idea where you're going to have stakeholders and subject matter experts who might not even be involved in the call yet are going to want to say things. They're going to say things like, hey, I heard from a customer that we're having an issue with our order entry system right now. What's going on? So the IC can help manage the flow of that conversation. The IC can take that information as it comes in and say, okay, we have a report that says this is going on. I'm going to get a resource from our app team to see if we've done any pushes lately. So that provides some information back. And then the IC goes through and engages the resource if they're not already there. Maybe the app team is already on the call. Great. If not, we're going to engage them. And the IC does things like say, hey, here's the problem. I'm going to check back with you in 5 minutes. Please come back to me with what's going on. And if I haven't heard back from you in 5 minutes, I will come check with you. So remember, the IC is not the one solving the problem, but is creating the context for everybody else to work together without having to worry about who's doing what and make sure that they all have the information that they need. So at the beginning of this, I asked if someone could keep track of time. Did anybody actually do that? Okay, so maybe, maybe not. But really, the reality that it usually doesn't work out so well is because of something we call the bystander effect. Everyone in the room assumed that somebody else was keeping track of time for me. So never use the phrase, can someone, right? Because you'll hit that bystander effect every time. No one will actually do what you want. And if they do it, if by chance they somehow do what you want, you won't know who it is, or that they've started, or that they understood it. So a better approach to this would have been to say, you, please, keep track of the time and give me a nod when we get to 30 minutes starting now. Understood? And if I don't get a response back, then I'm going to repeat it until we've got confirmation. So what about like in an incident situation? How might that go? So it might be something like, Rich, I'd like you to investigate the increased latency, try to find the cause. I'll come back to you in 5 minutes. Understood. And Rich says, understood. So what's a little bit different? This is a lot more verbose than can someone, but several important things happened in this exchange. The task was assigned to a specific person. Now, it's okay to assign it to a role. You can say the DBA on call, but it must be a single individual. It's not a team, because when everyone owns something, nobody does. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, too, when it comes to things like postmortems. But it's assigned to an individual human. And the task was given a time limit. So the subject matter expert knows exactly how long until the IC is going to come back to them for an answer, so they won't be surprised. Say, oh, whoa, you only gave me 5 minutes. I said, I told you I was going to give you 5 minutes, so we're clear. And the IC confirmed that the subject matter expert had understood the instructions and are going to carry them out. So this way, Eric doesn't come back in 5 minutes and find out that Rich hasn't actually done anything because he didn't understand what was supposed to be being done. Another thing that's kind of key is, so humor can be really helpful. Sometimes on an incident, the team can start chasing their tail, start going down rabbit holes, or just generally not being helpful to one another because it's a stressful situation. As an incident commander, you can use humor to kind of move the person doing something not so great out of the flow of conversation. So this clip is from air traffic control at JFK. So air traffic control, as we said, are constantly dispatching people from point A to point B so they don't, smash into each other. So it's a little funny, but he moves the conversation forward, right? I mean, the ATC made a joke, but then he also told the pilot what he needed to do. He said, okay, so this thing happened. And remember, incident calls don't have to be super cut and dry. They're important to your business. So humor can be a thing, but in the context of moving the conversation forward. You want to have a clear roster of who's been engaged, right? So have a roster of who the specific people are in each role. This is the DBA who has the thing going on. This DBA has not been involved. This is going to be important later, so your scribe needs to know this information. This is one that I believe in a lot, and this goes back to our conversation about the 100 people on the call, 95 of whom are doing nothing. So we want to rally fast and disband faster. So you want to get the right people on the call as soon as you need to, but get them off the call as soon as possible. It's really stressful to be sitting on a call thinking that this is an application issue and I'm the network engineer and I'm going to sit here for the next 45 minutes while the app team goes and tries to push a new change to see if that actually solved the problem. And in the meantime, I'm getting more and more annoyed and irritated, and it's adding stress and cognitive overload and just general annoyance or fear of annoyance to the people doing the work, because they're like, oh my God, there's like 100 people on this call all watching me and waiting to see what happens. So nothing good comes of it. So as the incident commander, start kicking people off the call as soon as they aren't needed. Don't worry, you can get them back. So get them off. And I mean, you set the expectation, say, okay, you know what? Hey, Rich, I don't think we need you anymore, so I'm gonna ask you to leave the call. Keep your phone on you. We'll call you if we need you again, but go ahead and go back to bed. And that really helps a lot, because then when you do need him, he hasn't been sitting there being annoyed. He's ready to go. And you want to have a clear way to contribute information to the call. So as you're keeping track of things, know how do subject matter experts share their information? Any way for the SME to say, hey, incident commander, I have some new information for you. So you may say we make all of our communications through a voice bridge, or maybe we're doing it in the Slack channel, and that's how things get communicated. One of the ways we do that at PagerDuty is the conversation happened. The information is communicated from the subject matter expert via mouth words on a voice bridge, but in the Slack channel that anybody can follow along, the scribe is saying, okay, this is what, Jimmy just said, XYZ. So that information is being contributed. And you need to have a really clear mechanism for making decisions. And this right here is an area where, along with the word incident, the term incident commander becomes somewhat controversial, but you always want to remember that okay versus not okay, emergency versus not emergency. This way of making decisions that I'm about to describe to you is perfectly good and well suited for incidents, and super not the way to make decisions as a group when everything is going well. So, first thing to make sure to remember is that if it's so easy that anyone can do it, then a computer can do it. So save the call for decisions that require humans. right? If things are simple, let the simple computer do it. So our first step is to make sure the only decisions we're making are ones that actually require a human's brain. And this is how it goes. Incident commander, I think we should do X. Incident commander says the proposed action is X. Is there any strong objection? So there's a little bit of psychology going on here, right? So first thing that's happening that's important is we're stating very definitively what the proposed solution is. Now, and then we're saying, is there any strong objection? The two good things that come out of this, first thing is by asking, is there any objection? It's a lot faster than saying, does everybody agree? Because does everybody agree means I have to go ask, I'm waiting for input from everybody. Does anybody disagree? I just have to listen for that. It reminds me of going backpacking in Boy Scouts when you wouldn't say, is everybody ready? You say, is anybody not ready? Because that's what you want to listen for. Is there any strong objection? This is how we make sure we don't start going down a bike shedding exercise of, well, that's probably not the optimal thing we could do, and let me get my opinion in there. And this is the place where it gets a little controversial because people say, well, maybe I'm not comfortable raising a strong objection. You have to be during an incident. If you care enough, then you gotta stick up for it. One of the other things that's controversial is it's better to make any decision than to make the wrong decision than to make no decision. And again, this is true during wartime. It is not true during peacetime. So we want to make sure that we're making forward motion. Capture everything, call out what's important now versus later. So write it all down, right? If you're able to, call out what's important to do later, right? You might say, okay, you know what? So we actually kind of realized that the problem is the temp drive was filling up because of logs, and we really should get around to writing a shell script that's going to be a cron job that rotates those logs. We should do that. Don't do that now, but capture it, because you're going to come up with a lot of ideas during the call that are not effective to do during the call, but make sure they're being captured so that you can figure out what your next steps are. And there's one last thing. You need to assign an owner to the review, the post-incident review, before the call is over. Again, we've restored service. Yay! Okay, people can place orders again. Awesome! All I want to do is get off the call. Not yet, because we absolutely need to make sure that the post-incident review or post-mortem or after-action report or whatever we want to call it has been assigned to a person. The incident commander does not necessarily have to be the owner, but it has to be assigned, and again, it needs to be assigned to a human. It's not assigned to, oh, well, the development team for this application will do it. Nope, Jimmy will do it. Because again, if everyone owns it, nobody owns it. So let's talk about what those things are. Now, has anyone here heard of blameless postmortems? Okay, cool, good. If you're not, you can Google them. We don't have a lot of time. This would be a whole talk in itself to talk about blameless postmortems, but their name will get you about halfway there. Also, I have resources at the end of this deck. I point to a blog post from, going on about 6 years ago that John Allspaw wrote when he was at Etsy, where he introduced the idea of blameless postmortems. So the whole thing is, after an incident, you have whether you call it an after-action report, a post-mortem, a learning review, I don't care. But what you're doing is you're capturing all the information about what went right, what went wrong, and you're going to review it. This is incredibly valuable. And you want to do this for all your incidents. Think about it this way. The NTSB has reports on all crashes, even if they aren't fatal. And don't forget that the impact to people is part of that post-incident review as well. So think about what happened to humans because of what happened. It's not, we tend to go down this path of saying, well, so then we realized that the problem was we didn't have a Nagios agent on this particular service, so that's why we didn't know about it, and it caught us from behind, and blah, blah, blah. But what we don't do is we don't say, hey, someone got called at 6 p.m. at their kid's birthday party because she was the only one who knew the information, and she had to miss her kid's birthday party. That's actually a huge problem to the organization. So if we can identify this, it helps us in the future alleviate stress on the individual, but it also makes our organization a lot more resilient. Because if that happened, we have an organizational problem that we need to be able to fix. And we want to look at it in the light of day when we can do something about it, not when we're in the middle of stress. This is painful but valuable, which is to record your incident calls and review them afterwards. You can play them back at 1.5 or 2 times speed like you're listening to a podcast. This helps you find the things you didn't catch at the time, or you might not have addressed in the review. When you're writing and doing your post-incident review, you run into the recency effect. A lot of post-incident reviews have a lot to do with what happened in the last hour of the incident. because that's what you remember. And you might remember some of the stuff that happened at the very beginning, but all the stuff in the middle is what you forget about. So it's always good to review these calls. Again, it can be painful, but it's valuable. Another thing that's really key is, hey, continuous improvement. That's part of DevOps. So you want to regularly review your incident process itself. Whether you do that quarterly, you do that annually, just make sure you're asking the right questions in an incident. For example, at a certain point at PagerDuty, everybody in the company was paged during a critical incident. That worked great when the company was 60 people. It doesn't work well at 400. So you are continually changing how we do things. We're in the process ourselves of going through our incident response process and saying, how do we add commercial response as a formalized thing? How can we get better at that? We think we're pretty good at it, but how can we do better? And then finally, who's seen the movie Apollo 13? Pretty good movie. So if we think about what happens in Apollo 13, you've got a large number of technically adept people who are very good at running their infrastructure. They've got some monitoring in place. They've got an end user. And then suddenly their monitoring is telling them something slightly different than what they're used to seeing. And their end user is calling to tell them that the thing isn't doing what it normally does. So does this sound familiar to IT, right? The movie is a lot more dramatic than real life, but this is the first 2 minutes from the point of explosion of the actual flight director's loop of Apollo 13. And this is actually a really interesting illustration of a good incident call. So I want you to listen for when the subject matter experts start to offer information. Listen for pushback. The incident commander says, I think you're giving me information that is not correct. And then listen for when the incident commander starts the problem-solving loop. Okay, we've got some information from you, we've got some information from you, let's start putting it together and let's see what happens. So the point is we can borrow a lot from different industries, right? Every issue with our, kind of user sign-up form isn't the same thing as an Apollo capsule having a caution like that. And this also is a lot less dramatic than the Ron Howard version. Everybody sounds a lot calmer. But it's an example of what a really good incident call can sound like. And actually the entire loop of all of flight guidance and flight control is on YouTube, which is pretty cool. So a couple things to bear in mind if we think about it. We want to have our structure in place beforehand. We're going to practice a lot, have our clearly delineated roles, manage the flow of conversation, make those clear decisions, rally fast and disband faster. I believe in that really strongly, and continually review. If you want to learn a lot more about this, the folks from BlackRock wrote this book for O'Reilly called Incident Management for Operations, and this was the book that and the practice that BlackRock follows that was the inspiration for how we do incident response at PagerDuty. So I highly recommend this book, and just bear in mind, don't panic, stay calm. Calm people stay alive. Our the couple of the folks who helped create our incident response process at the company, they spent some time, oh goodness, stepping on their stuff, training with first responders, not actually, going and fighting fires, but just more classroom training with them. And one of the things that one of the firefighters told my colleague Eric, he said, a lot of times, he said, it's not uncommon, you'll be fighting a fire and a homeowner is panicking, as you will, your house is on fire. And they'll say, hey, look, this may be your first fire, but it's not our first fire. And that's the way to think about that. You're gonna have business owners, you're gonna have folks who are panicking and freaking out because their service is down. This may be their first fire, it's not your first fire. We practice a lot. We've open sourced our incident response docs, so they're available at response.pagerduty.com. They're on GitHub. We take pull requests to them. And our entire process is online, as well as all of our training material. So you can check it out, and you can always fork it on GitHub. Use it as a base for your own internal documentation. Again, I can't stress enough that this is what works for us. And it's a great place to start. But there's probably things that we do that you might not need to do. And there may be things that you need to do that we don't do. So let's not, don't cargo cult it. It also looks really pretty, so we've got all this prettiness. I think that slide was written by the guy who created the page. And don't worry about the eye chart here. I will make sure to post the link to these slides in the meetup. But just a couple of the resources. So this YouTube channel is Angry Air Traffic Controllers and Pilots, and that's where we got that clip from the ATC from. It's just absolutely hilarious. There's the Blameless Postmortems from the Etsy Codis Craft blog, which was, back in May of 2012. We did an episode of my podcast, Arrested DevOps, called Incidents and Accidents, go figure, examining failure without blame. It's my podcast co-host who came up with the title for this particular talk as well, so she really likes Paul Simon. And again, always you can go to response.pagerduty.com. And do we have any questions, any thoughts, any feedback? I'm open to hear what you have to say. What percentage of our man hours? So failure Fridays are about 3 hours long, but it's not everybody in the organization participating. And that's just because it will be, the participation is whoever would be on call for that particular service at that particular time is who's working on that. And then we have a chaos guild that kind of structures it. So I guess you would say we spend about 3 hours on Friday, and then there's about an hour on Wednesday, which is the Chaos Guild meeting where we make the plans for Failure Friday. So as a percentage, it's hard to say. It's probably even less than that because there's not everybody's participating. Yeah. Yeah. And it can be small too. You don't have to completely take down your load balancer or something like that. In fact, I would recommend you start doing failure injection at a very small level because the first place that it's helpful for you is not for testing the resilience of your system, but think about it, are you doing it to test your incident response process? So you can, and again, depends upon what your services are that you have to provide. So at PagerDuty, we have a pretty aggressive uptime because if we're down, everybody is screwed because you can't find out that you're down. So it's always something I find interesting is that I never really realized till I worked at the company how exciting it is to be an SRE at PagerDuty. Everybody's like, I want to be an SRE at AWS and at GitHub and all these places have these crazy uptime requirements. Come to PagerDuty sometime. where people get really, really mad if. So the thing is, our uptime requirement is there is no planned downtime. We have 0 maintenance windows. So we have to be able to have failure injection that does not cause degradation. And that doesn't mean we get to cherry pick what we do failure injection on, because technically nothing can fail and to the point to cause the service degradation. Like, the redundancy of systems has to exist. So what our actual literal contractual uptime numbers are and things like that, I'm not 100% sure. I'm certainly not going to share with you what I think they are, because this is on YouTube and I'll get in trouble because I'm sure I'll be wrong. But I do know that we don't carry maintenance windows, and that's actually one of the, to the point of not to say like, oh, we can do whatever we want. It's that we have no planned downtime. I mean, unplanned downtime is a thing that happens. But even then, that's considered unacceptable because of the impact that it has. And when we think about services like PagerDuty or GitHub or parts of AWS, and when we know, like, what happens when GitHub goes down? Everybody stops being able to work. That's kind of a big deal, right? And we could have a whole different conversation about owning your own availability when it comes to something like that. But when Amazon takes an outage, PagerDuty has to stay up. Because how else do you know that your service is down because US East went down? So it's a lot of, it could be a lot of stress. But then again, your requirements may be different. So you sit there and say like, okay, but if you backtrack it all the way back to what defines an incident, and especially what defines a major incident, those are the things you want to test. And you can test them in a game day, even without doing a failure injection. You may say, we're not actually, because our system is not resilient enough that we can just shut a server down and everything will be fine. We're not there yet. That's okay. But let's do it on paper. Let's pretend. Because this is going to be our way of running a game day of understanding exactly what would we do. And finding out where those holes might be in a safe way. And then once you feel like you've got it, then go ahead and roll those dice. You know, that's a whole other conversation about chaos engineering. Yeah. Yes, Aaron?
Failure Friday sounds like a regular fire drill. Do you have any, so if our organizations aren't doing this yet, do you have any advice on talking people into it? Obviously, we can give them a link to your YouTube video that we're producing tonight.
Yeah.
But any of those like tidbits, whatever, it helps people like just kind of open their mind up to it or whatever, that maybe aren't as technical as a group in the room.
There was, I'm going to have to dig it up because I'm trying to remember where I saw it, but there was a really good article that I read a couple months ago about explaining chaos engineering to the C-suite, and especially to do Failure Friday. And maybe don't call it that. That was one thing I definitely remember. Awesome. So we name things. We're very cynical in this business, I think. So I would look to that. Couple things that I wanted to mention. So Aaron mentioned, DevOps Days Kansas City is coming up, which is great, and I'm going to try to be there. I checked my schedule. I knew I was going to be out of the country around that time, but it's a week before, so as far as I know, I should be able to be there, especially if I'm speaking, but we'll see about that. But DevOps Days Chicago, and Chicago is not too far. It's just like a little hour-and-a-half plane ride from here. This will be our 5th one. It's August 28th and 29th. Our CFP is closed. In fact, once I get around to it, I'll be posting our program. We've got that settled. I can give you a couple little spoilers. We've got Donovan Brown from Microsoft speaking, Andrew Clay Schaefer, who was one of the cats who invented the word DevOps, and he's going to be speaking with us in a bunch of, we've got some local stories, and I'm really excited about our program. So I highly recommend coming to join us. It's a fun time. And if you like podcasts, I have a podcast called Arrested DevOps. Again, I've got some PagerDuty stickers, some Arrested DevOps stickers and buttons and stuff over there, so help yourself, and I'll be hanging out for a while afterwards, and we can chat about things being broken and how to make them less broken and all that DevOps stuff. So thanks for letting me be part of this tonight.
Gotta look at the elbow.
Oh, yeah, that's right. You watch the elbow.
That's how the internet works. Well, thank you all for attending. Hang out for a while. talk, make connections. Again, the way this group works is our goal is to make all of Kansas City tech better in any way that we can. So like anything that you can learn to like help better the culture of your companies and stuff. Like, who knows? I seem to change jobs a lot recently, and maybe I'll work at your company. So I want it to be an awesome company when I work there. So, and you the same when you come work with me, because we're doing awesome things in my company. So.
PagerDuty is also hiring, so if you go to pagerduty.com/careers, we're hiring engineers, we're hiring all sorts of people, we're hiring more of me, more DevOps evangelists, and we've got a pretty good remote culture. We're working on being a distributed workforce. Right now I say we are remote friendly, so we're not like GitLab, we're not remote first, but I'm working really hard to get us to understand that, even though I'm moving to be in the office, but that's another story.
All right, rock on.